XRP may be staging one of its most important comebacks in recent history, and right now the market is beginning to show signals that could completely change the long-term outlook for this asset. What we're seeing on the charts at this moment is exactly the type of rebound many long-term XRP holders have been waiting for. In today's video, we're going to break down several extremely important developments for GIX, analyze technical indicators that are flashing some very interesting signals, and discuss why this recent price action could potentially mark the beginning of a major long-term reversal. We'll also look at some charts that many investors haven't been paying attention to and discuss why they may be among the most important indicators for XRP moving forward. Hey guys, welcome back to Whiteboard Crypto Update. In today's video, we will talk about XRP. So be sure to stay focused, as you surely don't want to miss out on this. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications by hitting the bell so you never miss any of our uploads. This video is for educational purposes only. It is not financial advice. Always do your own research before making any investment decisions. Before we even begin looking at price charts, I want to spend a few minutes talking about something that I believe is absolutely critical for understanding XRP and the XRP ledger as a whole. One of the biggest mistakes that investors make when evaluating XRP is focusing entirely on the token itself, without taking the time to understand the underlying infrastructure and the vision that inspired its creation. Many people within the cryptocurrency industry are familiar with David Schwartz, who is widely recognized as one of the key architects behind the XRP ledger. However, fewer people are familiar with Arthur Brito, another foundational figure who played an essential role in creating the XRP ledger from its earliest days. What makes Arthur Brito particularly interesting is that he has remained largely out of the public spotlight, but his original vision for the XRP ecosystem remains incredibly important even today. One of the most fascinating concepts associated with Arthur Brito's perspective is the idea that XRP serves as what he described as the hidden plumbing of the financial system. Now, this phrase often gets misunderstood because people immediately begin trying to overanalyze the exact wording. But the underlying concept is actually very straightforward and incredibly powerful. When Arthur Brito referred to XRP as hidden plumbing, he was emphasizing that XRP is not simply a speculative digital asset. Rather, XRP serves as a fundamental component of a much larger system. The XRP ledger itself was designed as a decentralized mechanism for moving, clearing, and settling value across the internet in an efficient and neutral manner. In many ways, I view the XRP ledger as a decentralized clearinghouse operating continuously around the globe. Instead of relying on traditional financial intermediaries, centralized institutions, or legacy infrastructure, the XRP ledger provides a way for liquidity to be matched and transactions to be settled almost instantly through decentralized technology. If you really stop and think about it, clearing and settlement systems represent one of the most critical components of the entire global financial system. Every day, trillions of dollars move through various networks that require complex infrastructure, intermediaries, and operational oversight. What makes the XRP ledger revolutionary is that it seeks to perform many of these functions through decentralized technology operating on the internet itself. This is why I believe so many people underestimate the true significance of what the XRP ledger represents. Far too often, the conversation becomes entirely centered around the token price while ignoring the actual technological breakthrough occurring underneath the surface. The reality is that XRP functions as the liquidity layer that enables this entire system to operate. It acts as the mechanism that allows value to flow efficiently across the network. In that sense, the description of XRP as hidden plumbing becomes incredibly accurate because it represents an essential component that many users may never directly think about, yet the entire system depends upon it. And this distinction matters enormously because when we look across the cryptocurrency industry today, there are tens of thousands of digital assets. Depending on how you count them, there may be anywhere from 20,000 to 50,000 cryptocurrencies currently in existence. Yet the overwhelming majority of those assets do not provide truly essential utility. In many cases, the underlying blockchain networks could continue functioning even if their native tokens disappeared entirely. That is not the case with XRP. The XRP ledger was designed with XRP serving a critical and necessary role within the ecosystem itself. This is one of the primary reasons why I remain so optimistic about XRP over the long term. The value proposition isn't simply based on speculation or market hype. Instead, it is based on the potential adoption and expansion of an underlying financial infrastructure that requires XRP as a core component of its operation. Think about it this way. Imagine if internet protocols themselves had carried economic value. Imagine if the foundational protocols that enabled email or internet communication required a native value layer to function. Historically, they didn't. But blockchain technology operates differently because it often requires a native asset to facilitate security, settlement, liquidity, and economic coordination. What we're witnessing today is essentially the market attempting to determine the future value of these underlying technologies by pricing their native assets. The challenge, however, is that we are still in the very early stages of this entire technological evolution. Most people still struggle to fully understand how blockchain infrastructure will ultimately integrate into the broader global economy. I believe that institutional adoption will gradually change this dynamic. As large financial institutions begin evaluating blockchain networks more seriously, they will increasingly distinguish between projects that provide genuine systemic utility and projects whose tokens serve little practical purpose. And this is precisely where XRP's value proposition becomes extremely compelling. The XRP ledger provides a unique infrastructure solution, and XRP itself remains an indispensable component of that system. Now, with all of that context established, let's shift our attention toward the price charts because what we're currently seeing is extremely encouraging. One of the most important indicators on the XRP chart right now is the Weekly Relative Strength Index, or RSI. Recently, XRP registered what appears to be a second major bottom formation on the weekly RSI, bringing momentum indicators down to levels that historically have represented extreme oversold conditions. Outside of extraordinary market events such as the collapse of FTX and the Terra Luna crisis, these are among the most oversold readings XRP has experienced in years. The significant difference today is that we are not witnessing a major systemic collapse. Instead, we are observing what appears to be a market that simply lost confidence and enthusiasm over time. What's especially encouraging is that the RSI has now begun reversing upward, while XRP is simultaneously reclaiming an important weekly moving average. Historically, whenever XRP has entered similar conditions and subsequently reclaimed these technical levels, the market has often experienced significant rallies afterward. This doesn't guarantee future performance, of course, but it does provide strong evidence that the worst phase of the recent downturn may already be behind us. However, there's another chart that I believe could potentially be even more important, and that's the XRP versus Bitcoin chart. Many investors spend so much time analyzing XRP in dollar terms that they overlook its performance relative to Bitcoin itself. But historically, major trend changes within the cryptocurrency market often become visible first through these relative strength comparisons. When we examine the XRP BTC chart, we can see that XRP appears to be establishing a bottoming formation while simultaneously generating a bullish reversal pattern on its RSI indicator. At the same time, XRP is attempting to hold a major support zone that previously acted as a foundation throughout much of the period between 2020 and 2023. This creates a very interesting technical setup, because if XRP can successfully break higher against Bitcoin, it would likely represent a major shift in market sentiment and relative strength. What we're ultimately looking for now is confirmation through continued upward price action and additional bullish candles. Based on the current momentum indicators, there is certainly a possibility that such confirmation could arrive sooner rather than later. These are exactly the types of technical developments that long-term XRP investors have been waiting to see for months. Of course, many market participants remain skeptical. Some investors continue to argue that the broader cryptocurrency market remains weak or that additional downside remains possible. And while those concerns should always be considered, it's also important to recognize that markets often begin recovering long before the majority of participants become optimistic again. In my opinion, one of the major reasons cryptocurrency has underperformed recently has been a combination of regulatory uncertainty, elevated interest rates, and the enormous amount of capital that flowed into artificial intelligence investments. For the past several years, AI has captured the overwhelming majority of investor attention and capital allocation. However, while the long-term future of AI remains extraordinarily promising, we are beginning to see some signs that the initial investment frenzy may be cooling. As investors begin looking beyond the AI trade, many are starting to ask an important question: what major technological sectors have been overlooked or underappreciated? And cryptocurrency, particularly blockchain infrastructure, certainly fits that description. What's especially interesting is that blockchain technology itself may ultimately become a critical component of the broader AI ecosystem. Future financial systems cannot realistically operate on legacy infrastructure that was designed decades ago. Traditional financial rails were never built for programmability, automation, or real-time global settlement. The internet fundamentally transformed communication, entertainment, commerce, and information sharing. Yet, one of the largest systems that remains relatively untouched by true internet-native disruption is the movement of money itself. This brings us back to the fundamental question surrounding XRP and Ripple. If you believe that retail investors alone will somehow overthrow the traditional banking system, then XRP may not align with your investment thesis. However, if you believe that existing financial institutions will gradually modernize their infrastructure and integrate more deeply into internet-based financial systems, then the strategy pursued by Ripple and the XRP ecosystem begins to make much more sense. One of the most insightful observations ever made by David Schwartz involved the relationship between institutional and retail adoption. He argued that widespread retail adoption of blockchain technology would likely occur only after institutional adoption had already taken place. In other words, consumers would eventually use blockchain-powered services without necessarily realizing that blockchain technology was operating behind the scenes. This is remarkably similar to how the internet itself evolved. Most people don't understand the technical protocols powering their online experiences, yet they rely on them every single day. Another factor that has always stood out to me about the XRP ecosystem is the experience level of the people involved in its development. Rather than chasing short-term trends or speculative narratives, many of the individuals behind the XRP ledger have experience building and participating in earlier generations of internet infrastructure. That perspective matters because technological revolutions often reward those who understand long-term infrastructure development rather than those chasing temporary market excitement. Over the past several years, the blockchain industry has witnessed an enormous race to create increasingly complex smart contract ecosystems. However, there are growing debates about whether financial systems actually require such levels of complexity. The XRP ecosystem took a different approach from the beginning. Rather than prioritizing maximum complexity, it focused on efficiency, scalability, settlement, and institutional compatibility. As blockchain technology continues evolving and institutional adoption expands, I believe that philosophy may become increasingly valuable. Ultimately, major institutional capital allocators prioritize sophistication, long-term planning, risk management, and practical utility. Those are precisely the characteristics that have shaped the XRP ecosystem from its earliest stages. For all of these reasons, I remain extremely optimistic about where XRP could be headed over the next year and beyond. The technical indicators are becoming increasingly constructive, the broader market environment may be beginning to shift, and the long-term utility thesis remains as compelling as ever. If the current technical signals continue confirming what we're seeing today, there's a very real possibility that we're witnessing the early stages of something much bigger. And if that's the case, then what comes next could become one of the most exciting chapters in the history of the cryptocurrency market. Well, guys, that's all we have for you today. What are your thoughts on XRP? Get involved and let us know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.